Welcome to this week's edition of the Carolina Pro Football Report. Post-game, Panthers go down at the hands of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 46-23. Reginald Walker here, joined by 12-year NFL veteran Colin Cole. And Colin, we're going to get to the game in just a second, but first, let's go back to the stadium where Jason's standing by with the latest from Bank of America Stadium.
The Carolina Panthers fell 46-23 to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers today at home. It was their fifth straight loss. And while the last four losses for the Panthers, they've had the ball to either tie it up or take the lead in the final offensive drive, today was different. It was a blowout and is the most lopsided loss of the season for Carolina. And they've now lost to the Buccaneers twice. Both of them have been their largest loss of the season. The Panthers and Bucs were tied at the beginning of the third quarter. It was 17-17 at the end of the first half. Panthers actually led 17-10, but in the third quarter, the Panthers' third down woes on defense and offense, just frankly, it shot them in the foot. They weren't able to keep up, and Tom Brady and the Buccaneers were able to pull away. The most notable play of the game, Buccaneers running back Ronald Jones broke loose for a 98-yard touchdown, which is the longest offensive play ever given up by the Panthers, and that put Tampa Bay up by 2 possessions. Carolina inched back one more time after a Trenton Cannon 98-yard kickoff return, but Tampa Bay responded with 2 touchdowns. Panthers fell apart, and head coach Matt Rhule said in the post-game press conference that it was just unacceptable on every person in that locker room.
Unbelievably disappointed in the way we played in the second half. Completely unacceptable from every member of that locker room, player, coach. Completely unacceptable. And a lot of credit goes to them. Obviously, Tom Brady is, the best. And in the second half, couldn't make any plays to get them off the field, really, other than a couple in the red zone. And their run game hurt us with that 99-yard run. So we tried to be aggressive to stay in the game, but just didn't work out. So credit to them. I don't know anything about Teddy yet. They're working on him, so I don't have much on that. But obviously disappointed and completely unacceptable.
The Panthers just have to get back to the drawing board. They've lost 5 straight games now after being 3-2 following a 3-game winning streak early in the season. But now they look like the team that a lot of people predicted they would be, just not playing well. The last 4 games were close, but today's loss to Tampa just shows that Carolina is still far away from being where they're hoping to be.
All right, thanks, Jason. Colin, we're back. Another tough loss for the Carolina Panthers. It's interesting. You watch this team and through a quarter and 3/4, you're going, wow, they're hanging in there with another really good football team. And then it started to kind of go a little bit south. One of the things I want to start with is the big catch down the field to DJ Moore late in the second quarter that ended up being overturned on a review. To me, I thought the Panthers missed an opportunity there. Thought they needed to get the ball snapped and get going faster.
No question they missed the opportunity there. And I think there was a little bit of a mix-up because it looked like they stopped the clock. The clock was stopped at that point, and it seemed like they wanted to run a play. It seemed like they were ready to clock it right then and there. But when they saw that the clock was stopped, they were trying to run a play instead of wasting it down, which gave the booth, well, Tampa Bay obviously took the time out and gave the booth the opportunity to go ahead and review it. So that hurt. I could see the circumstances as to how that played out, but really that's what it was, is that they thought they had opportunity to run a play. And just the fact that they didn't realize that he didn't make the catch, that really put them in that position.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in that situation, I mean, we saw it even last week against the Chiefs. Joey Sly has a big leg. They were well within field goal range there. If you go ahead and spike the football, maybe you can get to the locker room with a 20-17 lead instead of going in tied at 17, and it feels different coming out in the third quarter. And speaking of the third quarter, and we both know adjustments at halftime are always made. I thought the major adjustment to me was Todd Bowles in the second half saying, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and heat Teddy up. I'm going to go ahead and challenge this offensive line of the Panthers.
Yeah, they came after him a lot and were able to get home. Unfortunately, they were able to, disrupt the passing game and really took Teddy out of the game from that point on. And, the other thing that happened within that course of time once the third quarter hit is the run game was kind of invisible from that point on. I wouldn't say that it was abandoned, but we didn't see Mike Davis run the ball nearly as much. And I think that hindered. I mean, obviously, Tampa Bay's ability to continue sustaining their drives and keeping the ball going down the field was a huge factor in them coming out with a victory today. But the running game at the end of the game, as well as, Teddy came out, he was hot, man, 10 for 10, and 2 touchdowns, and it was a hot first half, and so the second half they just weren't able to maintain that tempo that they had in the first half, and that's where the result came from.
Now, I was a DB. You were obviously a defensive lineman. I'm asking you this because you would understand this better than anybody. It seems as though this is an offensive line that lately, at least, has played well for 2.5, 3 quarters, that type of thing. And they seem to kind of start to leak oil, if you will, once you get midway through the third and into the fourth quarters. Is that something maybe defensive coaches are seeing on film and saying, hey, in the second half, if we start to turn it up on them, if we start to really attack the offensive line, we can make some big plays?
I think the biggest thing that I've seen over the last few weeks that has really hindered this offense has been more so than just the offensive line play. I would say more so has to do with their inability to stay multifaceted throughout the entire game. And when you become one-dimensional and you're just throwing the ball the entire time, then the pressures, the sacks, all that stuff starts to creep up, and those become a problem. So I think that what happened was that they kind of abandoned the run in the second half, which obviously Tampa Bay's offense and Tom Brady's effectiveness in the ability to get the ball to his playmakers obviously put them in a position where they had to try and keep up. They had to try and catch up and keep up. And unfortunately, that the run game became became obviously what had to suffer from there. But then everybody else kind of gets exploited. We can't forget that Russell Okung is missing yet another game. So the continuity of this offensive line is, when it comes down to having to stand up and deal with pass rush over and over again, especially when you have a defensive coordinator that's trying to get after you, it's proven difficult over these last few weeks.
And to that point, you talking about getting after it. I'm going to give a couple of numbers here. Carolina Panthers offensively, 1 for 9 on third downs. Conversely, for Carolina Panthers, let's just take it from their standpoint on defense, gave up 10 of 16 conversions, 10 of 16 opportunities for this Tampa Bay offense. So once again, third downs, inability to get off the field. And Colin, as a guy that played on that defensive front, and I want to go here next because I think this is important. Obviously, Brian Burns was pretty good throughout the game and was close a lot. But a guy like Tom Brady understands that, okay, this is the one guy that may be able to get home consistently. And it seemed as if he would change his level in the pocket very well. His drop may be at one point knowing that's where Brian Burns is going to go, but he always knew he was going to step forward. And if you cannot push that pocket in the middle, as a guy like yourself who played in the middle, if you can't sometimes push that pocket in the middle, it creates a lot of space for Tom Brady to manipulate.
No question. And the biggest about it for Tom, as well as any quarterback, we look at it like a Drew Brees, or we look at some of these other pocket passers who are maybe not necessarily the height stature. Those guys, the reason why they're successful is because the interior 3 offensive linemen, the center and 2 guards, really create a strong front for them, so that the offensive tackles, all they really have to do is push that defensive end back. And so in today's game, unfortunately, because there was no interior push by the defensive tackles, unfortunately, Tom was able to step up and, like you said, maneuver his way into the pocket, just like he's done throughout his career. Probably one of the best to ever, in terms of pocket awareness. May not be the fleetest of foot in terms of taking off and running on you, but in terms of finding that space in that pocket to find that open receiver, Tom is probably one of the best to ever do it. So you have to. You hit it right on the head. When you have interior pressure, you have interior defensive linemen, they can really push the pocket and create difficulty for that quarterback to step up. It really puts them in a position where they're oftentimes throwing off the back foot, stepping back kind of on the run, kind of pushing them back to the defensive ends who are rushing the edges. So it all works hand in hand. But when you have those guys interior that can push the pocket, like say a Chris Jenkins that was here with the Panthers for so many years, guys like that who are really able to really get that interior push, really cause those negative plays and cause for those opportunities for that defense to create turnovers.
And I think and I'm going to add to that, right? We're going to stay on this subject for a minute because I think, for you playing the position and understanding it so well, people need to understand, I think that sometimes, particularly with interior defensive linemen, it's not about the sacks. It's not necessarily about the numbers. And in this case, maybe people want to call out the name of, Zach Kerr or Derek Brown, and I'm not trying to single anybody out, but sometimes it's just creating that uncomfortable level or moving that line of scrimmage backwards 1 yard for the offense. It's not always about getting home. It's about creating the havoc so that other guys can get home.
No question. No question. Especially when you have a guy like Brian Burns coming off the edge, Etor, Gross-Matos, those guys who have the ability to really get around the edge of offensive tackles. When you add that extra level of having that interior pocket push, really pushes that quarterback to those guys and doesn't give them the opportunity to step up, because that's what the quarterback ultimately wants to do. The offensive line is supposed to create a cup-like pocket, so that quarterback can step up into that pocket and deliver the pass wherever he wants to. Now, when that pocket is pushed into his face, he becomes very uncomfortable, and the accuracy level go way down because of the fact that he just can't complete the ball because he can't step into it. Just like anybody who throws a ball, or anybody who, whether you watch baseball or any other sport where you're throwing the ball, those guys step into that throw to get the most power behind their throws. And if a quarterback can't step into his throw and really get that power behind his throw, oftentimes he throws a wounded duck, or doesn't have the velocity that he needs to oftentimes to get the ball where he wants to get it to.
And now, moving past that with this defense, and one of the things that I've watching this team play all year long, I'm consistently concerned about run fits, and just because for people at home, somebody has every gap all the way to the edges. And what we're consistently seeing is there's one guy out of a gap, and that's the gap that gets exploited generally for the big play. If you look at the big Ronald Jones run, a 98-yarder, essentially they were trying to work off a double team to get to the second level with their left guard and left tackle. Well, the left guard had nobody to block. Got all the way really to the third level because he ended up blocking, I think, the corner. And then Trey Boston coming down in the box has to make that play, misses that tackle. And again, I'm not trying to single him out, but that's what happened on the play. I think he'll tell you the same thing. You missed that, and now it's a foot race, and we saw that Ronald Jones was able to win that.
That's exactly what it is. And, it's you hit it right on the head. You being a defensive guy and anybody else out there that understands defenses, basically you have to own your spot. Just like we've seen coaches over the years say, do your job. Your job as a defensive front, as a defense as a whole, is to control the interior gaps, the gaps between the center guards and tackles. You have guys aligned in those positions. You have guys aligned off the ball, kind of in those gaps, to control those gaps, so that it's not so easy for offensive linemen to knock people out of their gaps, to be able to create those creases. And unfortunately, all too many times this year, this front has been exploited. And interiorly, get them to the level where they can, gain an angle so that runner could, get to that hole that they're trying to get to. And I don't really can't point my finger at one single thing, because I think it happens on every single play, that there's a time when guys are unfortunately not where they're supposed to be. And, oftentimes it's tough for guys coming from that second and third level, those linebackers and secondary guys, because if that defensive lineman is not where he's supposed to be, and you're planning on being where you're supposed to be, and he's where you are, then that leaves a wide open space, which is what we saw on that run. And, what has to get done is they have to go back to just really working on fundamental football and just really working on the basics, because obviously this has been a reoccurring issue that has reared its head throughout the season. And until they get it fixed, teams are going to continue to pressure them and press that run against them.
And to that point, as you were talking, I was like thinking through things, and I'm like, the other piece of that, right? And it seems to happen to either young teams or teams that are, struggling to find wins. When you're misaligned like that with a gap, it doesn't end up being a 15-yard run. It ends up being a 98-yard run. It doesn't end up being a 12-yard run. It ends up being a 55-yard touchdown. That's the worst part, is they're not just big plays. They're disastrous plays for the defense.
Yeah, they're glaring. It's the glaring issue that keeps showing its head over and over again. And just like you said, I mean, oftentimes you can mitigate those leaky yards. You can stop those things, get them down, get to another down. Putting Trey in that position, obviously 9 times out of 10, you're comfortable with Trey Boston being in that position, making that tackle. 9 times out of 10. Unfortunately, when you got a guy screaming at you, running full speed, that has every angle that he can use against you, that puts you in a position where you're at the defeated spot. And so again, it has to start up front. It has to start from the guys interiorly and moving out, and from there moving back. And until they can get it right interior and up front, we're going to have more of these issues. And I think the biggest thing is that they're growing, they're understanding, because we're seeing that they're shutting down a lot of this stuff, but it's just the one or two times when they kind of let their guard down, and it's reared its ugly head again. So I got to get back to the basics and got to get back to working at it again.
Yeah, and I think, to that point, and I've always said this: when you see teams start to struggle, I always say simplify it. Right. So some of the different gap schemes you might be running, some of the different blitz combinations you might be trying, simplify all of that and allow guys to not have to think and just play basic football. And sometimes that can kind of get their confidence going. What are your thoughts on that?
No question. No question. Sometimes you can see that they're thinking. I mean, I saw one or two plays out there in the third or fourth quarter, I believe, that guys were standing around looking for calls and looking to see what play they were running. And, it's being that this team, this staff has come from college, they've done a great job in implementing single word defenses in terms of, give them a single call and that tells everybody what they're doing. But this again with the loss of the offseason, it's still rearing its ugly head that they're still not all on the same page at all times, and so it's still a work in progress. Again, this is the season's not quite over yet. This is still a young coaching staff, and it's still a lot of work to be done. But unfortunately, it's another tough loss.
Yeah, it is, and we're going to kind of get ready to wrap up here. But one thing that stood out to me, and you and I have kind of had a brief conversation about it over the last two games, and I realized Christian McCaffrey returned against Kansas City. But over the last two games, Mike Davis just 8 carries, but 9 receptions. Not sure what the mindset is in terms of how they're using him right now. I thought, particularly in the Kansas City game, to if he would have had a few more carries, particularly in the first half, that may have paid dividends against that Chiefs defense in the second half to really let Christian McCaffrey kind of get loose in that game. I was looking to see if that was going to be the case in this game with him, and it seemed like they didn't do it as much. Curtis Samuel even got some carries in the first half. Just really kind of curious to me, was there anything else offensively that kind of stood out to you as maybe something that you didn't expect?
I would say that in regards to that, I agree that they definitely, for whatever reason, abandoned the run, so to speak, in terms of giving it to Mike Davis, who has proven himself. I think that, sometimes you can kind of get too fancy, especially when it comes to Curtis, giving him those touches. He's proven himself in terms of what he can do with the ball out of the backfield when he gets it in his hands. However, your bell cow over the last few weeks has been Mike Davis, and his carries have diminished greatly over the time that he's been the starter at running back. I think it points a lot more to them trying to, keep up with the teams. Consider what happened last week with Kansas City. They ended up going out and getting a bit of a lead, and they kind of abandoned the run from there. And today's the same thing. They had it going in the first half. Everything was kind of clicking all cylinders. In the second half, there was some adjustments made, just like you said. Bowles made a lot more, called a few more pressures, and came after Teddy a bit more. And I think at that point, the run was more so trying to try and show some sort of balance, more so than actually to lean on it, especially once the score started getting out of hand.
Yeah, and then lastly, you can hear on the TV they were talking about the way that Mike Evans was making some plays kind of later in the game, and Gronk making some plays as well. But I thought at least for about 2.5, 3 quarters, to me, obviously we know about the throw that Tom Brady made to Cameron Brate against Chin down near the goal. And that's a ridiculous throw. And then the play that Gronk made against Chin, the longer, the big play, the 50+ yard play. I thought Chin was actually in pretty good position. He just didn't get the big guy on the ground. I thought this secondary did some decent things against some really, really good receivers. But after a while, the pressure on young guys, you're going to see big time players like Mike Evans and Gronk and Cameron Brate. They're going to eventually make their plays.
I take it back to the front. It works hand in hand. The pass rush helps out the secondary. The secondary forces the quarterback to hold the ball just a tick of a second longer, so the pass rush can get there. We talked about Tom's ability to step up with Brian Burns getting pressure off his backside a few times. But again, yes, they wore down. And the secondary can only hold up for so long without that front being able to really take over a game and really really dictate the tempo of the game. And unfortunately, Tampa Bay's ability and Tom Brady's ability to dictate the tempo of the game today really was the determining factor. Not to mention the offensive line's ability to really just take it to that defensive front. I mean, between Fournette and the other young man, Ronald Jones, who racked up almost 200 yards. I mean, it was that's what you want ultimately. That's what we're looking for. You want to be able to run the ball and control the game and control the tempo and do what you want to do on offense. And the secondary, yeah, they were unfortunately they did fall victim to a few passes. And Jeremy Chin, like you mentioned, he was in great position in both of those plays. It's just the touchdown to break, it was just a step too slow, but he was right there. He couldn't have played it any better than he did. And then Gronk, he's going to be a Hall of Famer one day, and he had a rude introduction to him on that singular play. But these guys, again, I think that everybody has to remember that this group of rookies, again, these are first-year players in the NFL playing against grown men. This group of rookies has matured a lot and have had to do so trial by fire, and so they're going to continue to grow. They're going to continue to get better, and I'm anxious to see how they do so moving forward throughout the remainder of this season and obviously years to come.
Speaking of moving forward, I mean, the Panthers get a Detroit team next week that, look, they were up big against Washington today and then ended up having to survive at the end. I mean, but you look at this Panthers team, they're sitting at 3-7, which is obviously not the ideal situation. But if you look at the last 6 games, outside of the game against the New Orleans Saints, a lot of these games are actually very winnable for the Carolina Panthers. I mean, you think about it, they've got Detroit, and then they go to the Packers, or I'm sorry, the Vikings. Then you got Denver. Obviously, the Packer game is going to be difficult, and then Washington, who's struggling as well, and the Saints. So you look at this Panthers team, and there's a chance that they could, find a way to win, maybe 4 of these last 6 games and kind of finish on a strong note. Kind of what are your thoughts as they move towards next week? What do you think one of the keys for that game is going to be for them to be able to get a win against Detroit?
Honestly, I think the biggest keys are going to be getting some people back healthy, getting Russ back, see if he can get him back healthy on the field, getting Christian back on the field healthy. Those are going to be 2 of the biggest keys, especially for the offense. Just being able to get back in rhythm and get back to being the dynamic offense that we know that they could be. These teams that you mentioned coming down the stretch, they're definitely beatable teams. The biggest thing for this Carolina Panthers team at this turn point in time is going to have to come down to these guys really finding out who they are. Ultimately, Mike Davis has shown the ability to carry this team running the football. Christian McCaffrey has shown the ability to carry this team running the football. You got to be able to obviously get all the playmakers involved, but at the end of the day, if we can't keep Teddy upright and we can't run the ball consistently, we're going to struggle down the stretch. So getting back to basics, I like what you were talking about earlier in terms of simplifying some things defensively, taking some things out of their hands in terms of what this young secondary has to do. I think today's game is really indicative of how young this team is, because you're dealing with 3 pro-level offensive wide receivers, and you're dealing with a very young secondary. Troy Pryor, he's a rookie. I mean, Jeremy Chin, rookie. I mean, how many rookies did they start today? I mean, let's think about this. Etor, a rookie. Derek Brown's a rookie. I saw Bravion Roy out there on the first snap. He started. He's a rookie. So, I mean, you're starting a lot of young players out there in key positions. And so, I think they're going to continue to grow, like I said, but they're going through those growing pains right now. So being consistent, playing complementary football, this team can get back in the win column next week.
Yeah, Colin, that you hit the nail on the head, man. And as we wrap this thing up, we appreciate your time. And Colin, I'll leave you with this on the way out the door. The only scary thing for me as I look forward with the Carolina Panthers the next 2 games is Detroit has DeAndre Swift in the backfield, and then Minnesota has Dalvin Cook. So it's going to be a tall task for the Carolina Panthers. But I think if they stay focused, simplify on defense, get their run fit solidified, they've got a chance to win both of those games.
Well, Reg, this is the NFL. There's no down weeks. There's no slippery rocks. I always say that. I don't know anybody that's slippery rock. I don't know anybody who ever went to slippery rocks, so no disrespect to slippery rock. But there are no gimme games whatsoever on the schedule. Every team's going to have that premier running back, going to have that premier quarterback. So in order for this team to find out who they are, who they want to be, they got to take every challenge the way that it is. And yeah, this week is going to be Swift and that Detroit Lions offense, who has been, you mentioned earlier they had to kind of hold off at the end, but they're going to be hungry coming up this next coming week.
Absolutely. And we thank everybody for joining us on this week's Carolina Pro Football Report post-game show on ADSN. For Colin Cole, I'm Reginald Walker. We'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.